first of all, I want to thank you all for having me here today. I'm thrilled to be back on Ender's Island. I'm so jealous of the fact that you guys get to hang out here for 2 weeks. I absolutely love this place. And I think probably most of you have a bit of a sense of the publishing industry itself and what an agent does, but I thought we could spend a little time today talking about the general process of how one gets from those few words on your computer or in your note cards or on whatever notebook you do your writing on to a book on the shelf, and just kind of trace that arc very briefly, and then talk about the role of the agent within that process, and then turn matters over to more important questions that you guys care about, like why do I need an agent and how do I get one? So that's basically what I'd like to go through today. Briefly, I don't really know what I should tell you about myself. Bill didn't tell me I was going to need to talk about myself. I'm not prepared for that.
It's a testimony.
It's a test. I have run Go Literary in Boston for about 3 years now. I trained at the Laura Gross Literary Agency. I worked there for 5.5, almost 6 years as I was working on a PhD in American history. So I come to agenting from an academic background, but I pride myself on being a recovering academic. I am very much into fiction, equally enamored by fiction and nonfiction. I just care about good stories, great writing, compelling ways of approaching familiar and new topics is really what I'm interested in. And people always love to jump out with that first question, what are you looking for? And I can't really answer that question because I know when I see it, but I am not an agent who says I only represent this category or I only look at this genre. I really am open to a wide array of submissions. There are very few things that I don't represent. Most of them tend to be books about pets, only because I'm allergic to pets and they're just not my thing. I don't tend to do science fiction or fantasy, but I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but in general it's not the type of writing that speaks to me, so I don't consider myself to be the best agent for that kind of work. I like to take on projects that I think I can help to improve, and if I can't help the project, it just doesn't feel like it's necessarily the right fit for me. So that's kind of what my parameters are. I don't think you need to know anything else about me. I feel like that's probably more than you needed to know, but unless there are any initial questions, I guess I'll get started. All right, good. So as I said, I thought we'd start with an overview of the traditional publishing process, looking at how a manuscript or a book idea makes its way onto the shelf. And I should just say up front, by traditional publishing, I do mean a publisher who pays you an advance and royalties in exchange for the rights to publish your work for a specific period of time, and someone who assumes all production costs. So we're not talking about self-publishing, we're not talking about vanity presses. We are probably talking about some hybrid presses just because the nature of that business keeps changing, but more specifically, we're talking about kind of the old publishing model. Do I have fiction and nonfiction writers in the room? Oh, awesome. So the first thing you need to know, if you guys haven't figured this out yet from your conversations, is that the path to publication for fiction and nonfiction is actually pretty different. If you're writing fiction or memoir, which is often handled as fiction and not as nonfiction, just in the terms, in the way that we submit that type of work, in the way that it's sold and considered, not in the way that it's shelved or read. The quality of your writing is obviously, and I feel stupid kind of saying that to writing students, but is what matters above all else if you're looking for a traditional publisher. Generally speaking, it is crucial to have a completed manuscript before you start querying agents or editors. This was not necessarily the case up until several years ago, but just given the explosion in the number of authors, paralleled with the diminishing number of publishers and imprints available, the competition has just become so fierce that very few agents or editors want to talk to you unless they can read the full manuscript of a work of fiction. Mostly because if we love 90% of it but hate the ending, we're in a little bit of a predicament. Can we work with you or not work with you? So that people there are some people out there who still don't realize how important it is to have that complete manuscript, especially if you're a first-time author. But now, even if you're an already published author, it is increasingly hard to submit half a manuscript in the hopes of getting an agent and or an editor or publisher to make an offer. I think.
Sorry,
no,
that's
please.
a question while you're on that. Do you prefer a manuscript that you feel is like really polished to the point? So yeah.
Yes. The short answer is yes, but what would finish the rest of it?
I don't know, just in thoughts of if it's closer to a draft form, if it feels more malleable to the writer to the point where you could come in as the agent and say, these are things that I think need to be changed.
Right. So that's a great question. The advice that I give, and I think in general what we want to see, is we want the manuscript in the form in which you think it is at its best, strongest, and most complete. So people who send me unedited manuscripts, and I get them all the time, it's very hard for me to know if you're a good writer if there are 1,000,005 typos, because I don't know if you're just rushing through and didn't take the time to read it over, which is also somewhat problematic because this is a profession. You do want to put your most professional foot forward. But the other side of that is, as agents and editors, when we read manuscripts, we know that we're never reading the final product. So let's say you submit me what you think is your most perfect, polished, professionally edited, you've done everything you can do to that manuscript, and I love it and I want to work with you. I am most likely still going to have edits for you and things that either plot lines that I think need to be strengthened before we can turn around and sell it, or some characters who I think are not really relevant to your story and should be killed off or not exist in the book, or I might think the structure doesn't quite work the way it is, and part of finding an agent and or an editor is finding someone who really either shares your vision for the book the way it is, or might present something to you that you think is even better than what you have, and you might love my ideas and say, oh, fabulous, I'm going to rewrite. And that can go one of two ways. I can make you an offer of representation and we would work on those edits together, and then I would turn around and submit the book and hopefully find you a book deal. Or I could say, I really like this, but I'm asking for a revise and resubmit, which is go back, write it, and if I like the way you've changed it enough, then I'll consider making you an offer. But we don't ever want to see anything that's raw or that says, chapters 3 through 5 will be written at a later date when I figure out what's going to happen here, because I've seen that too. Or, here's kind of what I think my story should be, but anything you like, I can do. We want you to be confident and proud of your work by the time it reaches us, but we do want you to understand that most likely it will change in one way or another. And then, of course, once it's sold to a publishing house, your editor is going to have 1,000,001 other edits for you. So you should submit knowing that this is as finished as it can be for the moment, but most likely not exactly word for word as it will appear in print on the day of your book launch. That was a really long-winded answer, I'm sorry. But that's a great question, so thank you. I think, and this speaks to your question directly, one of the biggest mistakes that new writers make is that they rush into the process, is that they get that first draft. November has become my favorite, most hated month, because everybody does Nano Writers Month, and they think, oh, I wrote a book in 30 days, here you go. And I kid you not, my submission inbox triples in that month, and you get 700 or more novels that were written in 30 days or less. National Writing Month is a great initiative. I'm not trying to poo-poo it, I know a lot of people who do. But I kind of wanted to come with a disclaimer saying, by the way, you can't really write your novel in 30 days. You can just get started or get a draft and then, spend a year or however long it takes you to really go back and clean it up and finish it. So you're probably going to be somewhere in between that 30-day writing and the 8-year or whatever the max. I mean, I've had people submit books who they say have been working on it for 10, 15 years. You will reach that point in your writing, and as writing students, I think you're all pretty confident, you know where you're going with it. You will reach that point where you know there's nothing else I can do here. Test the waters. Just query a few agents. If they all write back and say, I'm really sorry, this doesn't feel right, then you'll think, have I not found the right agents? Or am I missing something? Does this need more work? So there is no 100% answer for when you're ready, but 30 days is not it. I can tell you that. It most likely is not it. Along the same lines, and you guys are all writers, so you know this, anyone you can give your work to before you turn it over to us so-called professionals, writing groups, critique groups, mentors, beta reader, whoever they are, and when you think it's done, put it away for a few weeks, a month, 2 months, go back to it, look at it again. You know, once you've done that, once you've gone through that painful, tortuous process, you've just got to bite the bullet at some point. Nonfiction writers. In some ways, your work is a little bit easier, and in some ways, it is horribly more difficult. The difference between fiction and nonfiction is that when you write nonfiction, you don't have to have a completed book to find an agent or an editor. Sometimes you don't even have to have a book at all. An agent or an editor will read an article that you wrote or hear about the work that you're doing, and they'll reach out to you and say, this sounds awesome, this should be a book, let's talk. But for the most part, what happens is you will write a proposal. And you will provide 2 sample chapters. And the hope is that an agent can sell your book based on those 2 chapters and the proposal, so that, as people say to me all the time, do I have to write the book if no one's going to pay me for it? Well, no, you don't. If you're in it only to get paid, you can try to sell a book on proposal and sample chapters. But I will say, this is also not the easiest feats. Book proposals are meant to prove the marketability of your idea. So it's not just, hey, I wrote this book, it's awesome, you should read it, but it is a very detailed, and how many of you are people working on proposals, not nonfiction writers? Are you not at that stage yet? That's fine. We can talk in more detail about what goes into a proposal if you guys are curious. I don't want to spend too much time on it in case you're not at that stage yet. But basically, the proposal is meant to argue why your book or your book idea is a saleable idea, and that to prove that you know the target audience, the market for this book, right? That there are actual living people who want to read books about what you're writing about, and that you know how to reach them. So basically, agents and or publishers want you to answer 3 essential questions, right? The so what question. Why does this book need to exist? What sets this book apart from others in the market? And I'll give you a really polite hint here. Please don't ever write in your proposal, I'm the first person ever writing about X topic, and no one has ever even thought about this, because an editor or publisher, at the end of the day, works for a corporation that cares about bottom lines, and the first question they're going to ask you is, if nobody's ever written about this, does anybody want to read about it? So whether you're looking at a new angle in a certain field, or whether you're looking at a new subject within a broader field, you do need to address the literature in that broader field. You do need to show that people have bought books in this category, that you are not inventing something wholly unthought of before, because that actually scares editors, and that's kind of one of the big differences between trade presses and academic press, right? In academia, everybody wants to be the first to discover something, and you always want to say, oh, I'm writing about something no one's ever thought of. You can absolutely write about something no one's ever thought of, but you have to be able to connect it back to things that people do think about and do care about. Hi. No, you're fine. Come on in. The second question a proposal has to answer is the who cares question, right? Having a unique idea is not enough to sell a book. You have to make clear that there are people who want to read this book. And then the third question is the who are you, right? What are your credentials to show that you are the appropriate person to write this book, and that you have the platform to help market this book? It's sort of unfortunate, because I'm sure there are many, many fabulous writers who write about topics that they are not necessarily academically trained or professionally trained to speak about, and they probably do a really good job. They have a much lower chance of getting a traditional publisher to listen to them, because traditional publishers in nonfiction think about books in the tens of thousands. And if they don't think you are the person to sell 10,000 copies of this book, they are unlikely to offer on that book. So for example, I get tons of queries for people writing history, especially, as I said, I was a historian, and so I love the category. I absolutely love to represent both historical fiction and nonfiction, history and current events. And sometimes you just get the random guy who's decided he knows everything that's never been said about the American Revolution, who's going to write the next bestseller. And first of all, you know, as soon as somebody bills their book as the next bestseller, it probably is not, because you're not supposed to do that. But also, this person has never taken a history class, this person does not belong to professional historical associations. He has no way to reach the market that he wants to reach. And so it is very unlikely that he is going to get that book. And there are pluses and minuses, but the truth is you have to be schooled in some way or other in the nonfiction field that you are writing. So if you are a nurse writing about something medical, that's great. You know, you are credentialed, that's fine. If you were a patient, you know, if you have some sort of connection, but if you are just a lover of the American Revolution who never studied and doesn't know the literature in the field, you're making it harder for yourself, which is not to say it's totally impossible, it's just highly unlikely in the traditional publishing model. And then the last thing is to prove that you can reach the audience that you want to reach, which I think I already said, but I can't stress enough that if you cannot bring the audience to the publisher is probably not going to listen to you for very long. Again, it's a question of dollars and cents, right? They need to see a return on their investment. And unfortunately, marketing and publicity departments, and even in the big houses, just don't have the time to do that kind of market research. They need you to bring the answers to them in many ways. They will work with you. They will work with you very happily, but they will not spend weeks and months doing the research that it takes to figure out how it is that you reach, you know, people interested in the American Revolution or interested in, I don't know, sub-Saharan culture, whatever, you know, whatever topic it is that you're writing about. They're just not experts in everything. But let's assume now that all of this is done. You, as a fiction writer, you have perfectly polished, wonderful manuscript. It checks all the boxes, or you have the perfectly polished, fabulous proposal that shows that you are the expert in your field to write your book on whatever it is you're writing your book on. And you already have an agent, and I'm going to skip over the getting the agent part for right now and come back to it. You know, and you've got this book deal in hand. What happens next? Have you guys spent any time? I guess this is more of a writing program, so you probably don't spend much time on the actual process, but I just want to go over it really quickly. So the first thing that'll happen when you deliver your manuscript to a publisher will be that it'll go through at least one and probably several rounds of content editing. A substantive editor will comb through every line in the manuscript, critiquing your ideas. Does the sequence of events make sense? Are the characters' motivations believable? Is the climax exciting? Is the denouement satisfying? Those kind of big structural and questions, as well as smaller details, but not on the level of copy editing, but just, you know, on page this, your character's hair was red and now she's blonde, what's going on? Or, you know, she was holding her hairbrush and now she, 5 pages later, is still holding it. Ridiculous things that you would never notice in your own editing because you're so used to your manuscript. It is unbelievable the kinds of things that content editors will come up with. You know, does the person's choice of language in dialogue make sense? Would she say mom, or would she say mother, or would she say mommy? Those kind of things. This can take anywhere from a month to a year, I kid you not, depending on the publisher's schedule, depending on how quickly your editor works. Let's say you're done with that. That's only phase 1 of editing. You will then go through copy editing. So questions like mechanics, grammar, language usage, sentence structure. As all of this is going on, there is a design team working on in the background, starting to put together the physical look of your book, typeset, covers. Their bottom line is the bottom line. They will design a cover that they think will sell copies of your book, not the cover that you have dreamed of since the moment you wrote the first chapter of this book. This is one of the hardest things as an agent to tell a client, is how to react when they get that initial book cover. And I think part of the shock is that it's the first time you see your own product as a commodity, and you start to see how other people understand it, and it can be really shocking. I've had several clients this year alone with cover drama. I had one, the book is absolutely a gorgeous book. It's about the first foodie in the world. It's set in ancient Rome, and this is a real character. He was written about in the annals of Roman history. We know very little about him except for the way he died, which I can't tell you because it'll ruin the book. And it is a visually stunning book because it is so centered on food, but it also has dirty politics. It's a very dark book. And my client had a very clear vision of what she thought a cover for this book would look like. And we get the first draft of the cover back from marketing, and she was almost in, we were half laughing and half in tears. It looked like the cheesiest romance. It was a beautiful cover. It was textured, but it was white with a woman in a stunning gold gown that I feel like I would have worn to someone's wedding, but probably did not exist in ancient Rome. It had nothing to do with food. And I should tell you, there are no major female characters in the book, so we're not sure who the woman was. And she was beside herself. Now, we were really lucky. Marketing, this is a Simon Schuster book, Touchstone imprint. They could have said, we don't care. This is the cover, because we think it'll sell. They were super understanding and went back to the drawing board and tried something completely different and came back to us with a black cover with a person who's now dressed in more appropriate Roman garb. And this beautiful, I should have brought the cover, I'm not that smart, I didn't think of it, a beautiful tablescape with fruits and oysters and all kinds of food, half of which did not exist in ancient Rome, including strawberries and this beautiful silver tray that it was all being served on, which also did not exist in ancient Rome. So, we thought, okay, well, better, but. And we went back to them for round 3. Anyways, they got it right in the end. But this is part of what the agent does, is not leave your client lying there crying and saying like, well, we don't care about your cover, but this is just to show how much goes into the production. I had a similar thing, a nonfiction book that I did this year. Cover came back and my author loved it. His book is about, he was the New York State prosecutor who uncovered Rockefeller's cover-up in the Attica prison riots, and it's a stunning police procedural of how he figured out what was going on and was forced to resign in protest and broke the story on the front page of the New York Times. And we get the cover and it's amazing. It's also a black cover with flames coming out of the prison and police officers lined up ready to charge the prison wall. They were the wrong police officers. They were police officers who were not involved at all, but you could see so clearly what the uniform said, so major historical inaccuracy. And that one was actually not as easy to get corrected as you thought. They kind of wanted to go with it because they loved the cover and they thought it really spoke to the topic. And finally they said, if you can find us a photo that you are willing to pay for yourself, or that we happen to be able to get for free through our arrangement with the Associated Press, then we will consider a change. They did it in the end, and again, the cover it's totally different and way better than what that first one that we thought loved. But this is just to show. Go ahead.
I think in my experience, it's also part of the problem is that the art department, the designers, don't read the book.
Absolutely, that is 100% sad and true. They read chapter 1. I'm told, or the synopsis.
In these agreements, because I'm sure they're contractual, what power does the writer have when it comes to an issue like
That's
that?
a great question. So again, this is something that varies by contract. Most standard boilerplate contracts will not give the author any particular say. Some will say that they can review cover images and things like that. As an agent, it is our job to negotiate every inch of that contract that we can. And sometimes we win and we can put in protections, and sometimes we can't. I don't know a single agent. Maybe if you're a New York Times bestseller on your 8th, bestseller, they might give you full power to veto. I have always been able to negotiate the protection that the cover is at the discretion of the publisher with author's approval, meaning that they will show it to you, but the final decision always rests with the publisher. And it is very hard to get more than that. But the truth of the matter is, in 9 times out of 10, the publisher wants to make the author happy, they might not totally redo the cover, but we will work on a compromise until there's nobody in the room that wants to kill themselves. But you, as an author, will never get 100% control over that, ever. As you know, it's so rare that I'm confident in saying ever. But I know of one horrible situation where an author, they compromised as much as they could, and the author still absolutely despised the cover and couldn't look at her book. But I don't know of anyone who's been able to say, oh yeah, the author can just supply their own cover. You can ask, but very, very, very rare. So this is not the only thing that an agent does, but it's kind of one of the fun things that we get to do. The rest of that process, just to go through it really quickly, is production, proofreading, marketing and PR is working behind the scenes, really from day one to start building a campaign. These campaigns, unfortunately, have become shorter and less budgeted than ever before, but you have to believe that the publishing house wants your book to do as well as it can do. So they are working behind the scenes all the time. Authors don't usually find out about it until the 6 weeks before their book launches, and then they get a lot of attention for the 6 weeks before through the 6 weeks after. But the truth of the matter is that marketing and PR are really working behind the scenes from day one to generate buzz for your book. The sales teams are congregating at this time, trying to put forward their marketing strategy to sell your book to the sales reps, who then convince the bookstores to buy it. And then finally, we come to publication. This entire process can take upwards of 2 years. I kid you not. From the day you get a book contract to the day you actually see your book on a shelf can be anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, and sometimes even more, especially if you're writing nonfiction and you haven't yet written that book, right? Remember, we sold your book on a proposal and 2 chapters, so you still have a lot of writing to do before this entire process even begins. So that could be 2 years, 3 years. I mean, you just don't know. These are details that will be laid out in your contract. So other than covers, right, it seems like the publishing process really is a piece of cake. So why would you even need or want an agent? You could do this on your, I say that somewhat jokingly, but it's actually true. You can do it on your own. There are many people who feel that they don't need agents, and they're happy to do it on their own. There are others who feel like that is a full-time job in and of itself, and they already have full-time jobs and they're trying to write, so they don't have the time in their lives to handle this kind of work. And they prefer to seek out agents. I guess before you guys decide which route you want to take, I'll talk a little bit more about what the agent does. This is another favorite question that people love to ask me is, oh, what publisher do you work for? I don't work for a publisher. I work for the author. I run my own company, so I actually don't work for anybody, but I work for my clients. Our job is mostly known as contract negotiator. I think that's what most people think of when they think of agent, but that's really only one. I mean, it might be the most important thing that we do, but it's really only one of the things that we do. We assist our clients at every stage of this ridiculously long and complicated publishing process. We help shape book ideas. Sometimes people come to me and they just have an inkling of an idea, but it's something that I'm really intrigued in. It might be too early for me to sign that person, but I might say, hey, let's keep talking. There might be something here, and I might help that person shape that idea into a book proposal. Sometimes we work as editors. We are consultants at every level. So I like to kind of break it down in the following ways. We are guides, right? I think you could tell that the process I just described is really not that straightforward and pretty stressful for the author, especially a first-time author. Especially as publishing houses continue to merge and imprints continue to fold, editors are increasingly and I'm not saying this in a defensive way, I'm just saying they're human like we're all human. Unfortunately, they don't always have the time to answer your questions about every step of this process. As an agent, it is my job to be there to answer those questions for my clients, to kind of hold your hand and walk you through this process. And I don't always know the answer either. This industry is changing by the minute, and the rules are constantly up in the air and things aren't clear, but my job is to figure out what it is and to find the person to ask the questions to if we don't know the answers. As an agent, we work as editors. I went through most of that. We are also matchmakers, and this might be kind of one of, if not the most important thing in what we do. It is our job to know publishers and to know the individual editors and what their interests are, right? And you guys will learn this when you begin the querying process as well, to find agents as well. This is a subjective business. I already told you, I don't like books about pets. So if you're writing a book about your dog, you're probably not going to query me. In the same way that if I were selling your book about a dog, I wouldn't pitch it to an editor that I know hates dogs, or an editor who doesn't like sci-fi, or an editor who doesn't read children's lit. And people don't always stop to think about that. They just think, oh, agent, go, query, pitch. We all have our own interests, and editors all have their own interests. So it is my job to know what editors are hungry for, who's looking for what, who's getting divorced and doesn't want to read your family saga about a divorce story, or went through a divorce, came out on top, and loves that topic and only wants to read that kind of stuff. Who loves mountain climbing and wants to read your book about your trips around the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My philosophy when it comes to finding an editor for someone's book is not to find, not necessarily to accept the highest bidder. Of course, the dream is that the highest bidder is the perfect match for you, but that honestly isn't always the case. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but I was answering your question, Alex. I was answering Alex's question before about submitting manuscripts, and I said something about an editor sharing your vision for the book. And at the end of the day, as much as we all want, the high figure advances, for me, for what I want for my clients more than that is to find an editor who really shares their vision for the book and understands what he or she is trying to do, or has put forth an even better version that my client is extremely excited about and happy to work with this person to implement. That, I would say, is the most important part of our job, is finding that perfect match. But we also work as shock absorbers. I'm sure as writers, you've all faced rejection, and it sucks and it hurts and we hate it, but it is a fact of life in this masochistic business. As an agent, it is my job to handle those rejections for my clients, right? Not every editor is gonna offer on every book I put out there. It just, unfortunately, doesn't work that way. But sometimes there are really valuable lessons to be found in the rejection. Sometimes you're lucky and an editor will give you really bad feedback and say, I really didn't like this book because this, 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 and this. And it's my job to process that information and say, is she onto something here? Is there a weakness? Or is she just not the right editor for this book, and let's move on? And so there's a lot of back and forth with the client interpreting these rejections and feedback, and at what point do we say, okay, we should step back and revisit this, or when do we say, nah, she just didn't like it, screw her, let's move on. As an agent, I said before, I'm also a negotiator, right? Hammering out the most favorable terms in your contract is also a really important part of what I do. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name either,
Jeff.
But Jeff asked the question about, right, how do you protect your author when it comes to book titles and things like that? This is all part of the negotiation process, sorry. There are better contracts and there are worse contracts. Most publishers have the standard boilerplate contract, and as an agent, it is my job to go in and find all the language that does not protect my author and see how much of it I can get reworded, see what clauses I can get stricken, see if I can ask for higher royalties. Maybe I can retain some rights and sell them myself so that my client will earn higher returns. Maybe I can get that golden ticket and my client can pick his or her own cover. It's a negotiation that is also an important part of what we do. I also serve as an agent, as a mediator between the client and the editor, because inevitably throughout this lengthy editing process, or in these potentially contentious book cover discussions, my client's not going to be happy with something the editor says, or the editor is not going to like something the client says. It is crucial that the agent steps in to smooth out these relationships, or else, and sadly it does happen, things fall apart, the book never gets published, it gets shelved, they fight, the contract falls apart. There are so many things that can go wrong, so that we're there to smooth things out. Go ahead, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to going between like the writer and the editor, is it more common for the writer and editor to be going back and forth, or is it typically through, writer to you to editor?
That's a great question. So it works in every which way, right?
Okay.
We're all people, we all have different styles, and part of this business is finding the routine. How do we work? So I have some clients, actually I have a client who emailed me last week, his manuscript was due yesterday, and I emailed him at the beginning of the week saying, I haven't heard from you in a really long time, I sent you notes on some chapters, I just wanted to make sure that things are on schedule, will you be able to turn it in by the end of the week? And he wrote me back and he's like, oh my God, I totally forgot about you. I thought the book was due in June, so I submitted it. I should have told you. And that's fine. I don't have to. I mean, that just worked better for him, right? He was really nervous to get it in, and he thought, I'm just going to go straight to the source. And that's great, and that's fine. And then they looped me in, and now I'll be in on the editing process. I have other clients who, would barely email their mothers without copying me because they want me to know and that's fine too. That's great. It just depends how you're comfortable. But it is very common that at least at for certain issues or for certain questions that the author would go directly to the editor, not through me. But that is only after a contract has signed, right? An author never talks to an editor directly when we're in the phase of finding the right editor, right? Let's say I submit your book to Simon & Schuster and they love it. You can't just start calling Simon & Schuster and be like, hey, you're going to offer me a book deal or what, right? Let's say the editor says, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Rachel. Rachel's book is awesome. I'd really love to talk to her about some ideas that I had. I would set up that phone call. I would not give you the editor's phone number because you might suddenly start calling her. I mean, of course you wouldn't, but you never know. There are people who would. So I would set up that initial phone call, or I would give your number to the editor and have the editor call you. Once a contract is signed, once you guys work together, you can email freely back and forth. You will have his or her phone number. That's fine, and you'll loop me. I have another client that I mentioned, the former state prosecutor. He likes to advocate for himself, and that's fine. He went to Harvard Law School. So depending on the issue, he'll call me and he'll say like, I was thinking I should handle this one on my own because I'm probably going to be a little bit nasty, and I don't want him to get mad at you. And I'm like, that's funny, because it's my job to make sure he doesn't get mad at you. And he's like, no, that's fine. I got this. And that's just how he's comfortable. And so, you'll find that routine.
Okay.
But it does work every which way. And there are I know some people who haven't spoken to their editors in 2 years.
I was mostly curious because I know, it's a legally binding contract.
Right.
Like how much is restricted versus how much is open. But it sounds like it's mostly, once the contract's been signed, it's like open conversation.
It is open conversation, and you'll meet your publicity team, and you will speak to them directly. Once that contract is signed, you're kind of you'll usually go down and meet them face to face, and you'll get to know them really well, and at that point you can communicate with them on your own. But any other questions? I'm going through this a little bit.
How much of a legal background does an agent need to have? It sounds like there's a lot of legal activities.
That's a great question. I did not go to law school. I don't have a legal background. I don't know many agents. I don't know any agents, actually. Actually, that's not true. I have one friend who used to be a lawyer and is now an agent. It is not a prerequisite at all. We learn how to read those contracts pretty carefully, and there's only so much leeway that we get. It's just like people who work in real estate and they negotiate real estate deals. They don't have legal backgrounds. We learn the language. We know what we need to know. I have a lawyer that I consult with if there's something I'm not sure about, or if it's a big contract and I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. But beyond that, no. There are some people who don't work with agents, but who work with book lawyers. There are people lawyers who specialize specifically in authors' contracts. I don't know what they do they would only look at your contract. They wouldn't help you edit your book or do any of those other things. It just depends where your comfort level lies, I guess, but there's no legal background required. I'm trying to think of other fields where you would negotiate a contract but not be a lawyer. There are plenty. I feel like real estate's the one I know best because my husband works on real estate contracts all the time and he didn't go to law school. I'm sure there are others, but you get my Any other questions? Great. Go on. Yeah, please.
How big is this universe of editors that you have to know, and is it shrinking?
It is shrinking, and the turnover, I can't even, the turnover is insane. The universe of editors is pretty large. I don't know everyone, you can't know everyone, right? But it's, I mean, what, do you write full-time or do you work in another profession as well?
Yes, I write full-time, but not what I'm trying to publish.
So you don't know every other writer out there, right? But you have a network of writers who you know well and, and the relationships you cultivate. So it's the same kind of thing. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't pitch to editors that I haven't met and had coffee or a martini with.
Are they a known entity?
They are known entities, and even when they are not, there is a wonderful database of deal records, right? Published, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this site after, but I'll mention it now in case we don't get there. Publisher's Lunch, I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. They publish the listing of every deal that is, you know, if you submit your deal to them, they put out a daily email briefing, and you know, some days there are 20, some days there are 50, however many, and you see which agent sold whose book to which publisher and which editor in that house acquired it. So you start to see, oh, so-and-so at Farrar Straus really likes literary fiction. I should get to know her, you know, or, so the way I found the publisher at Simon & the editor at Simon & Schuster who acquired this book on the ancient Roman foodie was that she was not someone I had met. She was very new to the business, and she's actually out. She's already left. She worked there for just under a year, I think, and now she's in London doing a master's at the university, at the London School of Economics, so she's done. But I had seen that she acquired a book about a wine guy in Nazi Germany or something. And so I thought, well, she clearly likes wine, maybe, and there's a lot of wine in my book too, but I was like, oh, maybe she likes food. At Nazi Germany, I was like, oh, it's a historical novel. So I saw some parallels there. So I picked up the phone and introduced myself, and I said, I saw you acquired this book. I thought you might be interested in a book about the world's first foodie. And she, you know, I could hear the phone drop. She's like, yes, send it to me immediately. But sometimes we go to a lot of conferences, programs like this. We meet people, you know, you cultivate relationships, you get to know them and what they like. But there isn't an infinite number of houses left, and you can only submit to one editor at each imprint, right? So let's say I know everybody who works at, let me pull something out of my, I don't know, let's have HMH, because it's in Boston and I live in Boston. Let's say I know every editor who works there. I can't pitch them all. I have to decide which one I think is the one that is the best suited for the project that I have. And now
can you pitch multiple projects to those?
I could pitch as many projects as I want, but I'll tell you, editors don't love you if you send them 5 books and hope to get responses all at once. You know, I try to stagger. But I'm also not you know, I won't limit myself only to the people that I know, because I think that could be detrimental to my clients. I do know, and especially older agents kind of have their roster of the editors they know, and those are the only people they go to. And if they can't sell it to those 15 or 20 people, they say no thanks. I am very happy to cultivate new relationships if that's what it takes to sell the book. I see another question.
Yeah, and as far as that you are only making that pitch to one editor, how often do they hand it off internally?
That's a great question. There's no rhyme or reason to what happens. You can pitch it to an editor and she can say, oh, this sounds fabulous, please send it to me, and then you don't hear from her for 2 years because, you know, she got embarrassed and doesn't want to answer your call and tell you she never had time to read it, or she doesn't want to tell you she didn't like it, or she never took the time to write a letter. Sometimes someone will read. This actually happened to me recently. I pitched someone a book. I'm doing a history book, a social history of ballet class in America, and I pitched it to someone who I thought would be the perfect editor. And he wrote back and he said, have to be honest with you, I love the art, and he is an arts and culture and historian, and he has a background in history. I love the arts, I hate ballet more than anything in the world. It's like, it's so boring, and I just can't imagine reading 10 words about it. But I have a new colleague, you haven't met her yet, I think she would be interested, and he passed it off to her. Sometimes that never happens. Sometimes you just won't hear from that person. You can't predict, but it absolutely does happen. If someone thinks that they'll be better suited, if that their colleague will be better suited, if they have the time, if they care enough, they'll absolutely pass it on. But you just can't guarantee it. Go ahead.
So how do you get paid?
That's a great question. I don't get paid unless I sell my clients' work. Industry standard, every agent charges a 15% commission on domestic sales, and we get 20% on foreign sales, dramatic rights. So we're taking a risk, and one of the things I tell clients or prospective clients is, I can never guarantee you a book sale. I could think you've written the most brilliant book in the world, and you may have written the most brilliant book in the world. That still doesn't guarantee a book deal, right? There are so many factors that influence a publisher's decision to offer on a book that you can never predict with certainty that you can sell a book. And I've taken on books that I thought, oh, this is gonna be so easy, and a year later I'm like, oh, I can't believe I haven't sold this book yet. And I've taken on projects that I thought were really long shots, and I was handed a project that I was told I would never be able to sell. And like I said, it's now nominated for the National Book Award, so that person was wrong. So you just don't know. Sometimes the market isn't right. Let's say you were coming out with, I don't know, a new twist on Twilight now. Well, that fad has passed a little bit. Your book might be fabulous, but every editor might think, oh God, another vampire, no thanks. You might be writing a book about something that's really hot right now, but 6 months from now when your proposal is ready, nobody's interested, or the market is saturated, or for whatever reason, the editor is in a bad mood that day and just doesn't feel, you just don't know. But so, that was a very long-winded answer also, but the answer is we get paid when we sell your work. Sorry, I got carried away on that one. Yes?
Can you kind of give it, because you mentioned like the percentages, like the standard percentage breakdowns for the pie, like who's taking what percentage, because it's kind of mystifying.
Sure, that's a great question. So, well, a publishing house, right? You're talking about royalties now. You're not talking about an advance.
Well, I guess I technically don't even know what I'm talking about. Like,
all right. I'll make up. That's fine. I will. That's perfect. I'll make up a scenario and I'll use really little numbers because it's really hot in here, so my math is not going to be so good. Let's say you are offered a book deal. Does anyone know how an advance is calculated?
Estimated sales.
Right, exactly. So an advance is offered 10% of what a publisher thinks he will make in the first year of sales on your book is kind of the standard formula. Whether that's true or not, I can't guarantee you, but that is what we believe, and that is generally what goes into an offer. So let's run through some numbers. Let's say, and again I said we're going to use little numbers because it's hot in here and we're all MFA people, maybe we're not so good with that. I'm not. Let's say you get an advance of, you get an offer for $1,000. So that means the publisher thinks he will earn in the first year of sales of your book. Of that of your $1,000 advance, that's all yours, unless you've worked with an agent. The agent gets 15% of that, so the agent gets $50, and you get to keep the rest. That's pie number, right? That's pie number one. Now let's say the book comes out and you've sold so many copies that you've earned out your advance, right? Because that $1,000 is not free money. That $1,000 is an advance against royalties. So you've now sold enough copies of your book that you've paid off your $1,000 advance, and you're going to start earning royalties, right? Anybody know what royalties are at these days? So a standard royalty offer usually comes in somewhere, let's assume not an academic press, okay, let's assume a trade press. If it comes in any lower, an agent will be able to negotiate for you generally 10% on the first 5,000 copies sold, going up to 12 or 12.5 on the next 5,000 copies sold, and hopefully you can get that escalator to 15 at the most % by the time you sell more than 10,000 copies. Not a guarantee, but that's a pretty standard structure. An academic press, you'd be looking at something like 6%, going up to 7, going up to 8. So you're getting what, $1, somewhere between $1 and $2. Let's say, okay, so I have a book right now out retailing for $26.99, and she's earning 10% royalties right now. So what she's earning, $2.69 a book. I get 15% of every $2.69, right? The publisher gets everything else. So there's your second pie. Does that answer? So I mean, look, the long and short of it is, if you're in it for the money, go to law school or become a doctor. Don't write a book. And you have to think, again, most books are not right? To be a New York Times bestseller, you only need to sell about 10,000 copies, and most books are not New York Times bestsellers, so they're selling significantly less than $10,000 copies. So you have to think there's not that much money in it for the author. But when you start thinking about, hey, was my agent or was I able to retain subrights? Maybe you wrote a book that is really appealing to a French audience, and come on in. And they're willing, and you can find a French publisher who's willing to offer you a $5,000 advance to translate the book into French, where it's going to become a huge bestseller. Or even if it doesn't, you still get to keep that $5,000. You never have to pay back in advance unless you got into some sort of legal trouble and your contract was canceled and you're being sued for something. Otherwise, whether your book earns out the advance or not, that money is yours. But so when you start thinking about where else can I sell this book, what else can I do it? Is there a merchandising opportunity, right? Maybe you wrote some amazing YA novel that has some really cool superhero and people want to make that into a movie, or somebody wants to make an action figure or playing cards. I mean, I have no idea when you really start thinking, an app. The possibilities are endless when you start thinking. So there are other sources of potential income. It's just figuring out how to exploit those. But the actual book itself, as a debut novelist, it is very, you can kind of expect an advance of somewhere between 5 and 15, and I'm being generous on either end. 10 is kind of pretty normal. And that's probably with a bigger publisher, not a smaller publisher. So you're not talking about a very big pie to begin. Well, for the publisher, it's definitely a better deal. But that pie that you're sharing with an agent or with someone else, not a very big pie. Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about traditional, conventional, as you have been talking about, publishing versus self-publishing?
Sure.
I keep hearing a lot going back and forth about it.
Yeah. Do you have a specific question you want me to address?
I'm sorry, I don't.
That's fine. I'll put it out there up front that I'm not someone who's anti-self-publishing. I think the possibilities for what you can do now as an author are absolutely astounding, and in many ways it's a great time to be a writer because there are these other outlets. As it becomes harder and harder to get a traditional publishing deal, I think there are so many opportunities out there. Do I think everything that's self-published deserves to be read? No. But a lot of it does. The process is not similar. You write your Nano Writers Month book in 30 days and have it on Amazon for sale that same night. But I think there are some people who take the process of self-publishing really seriously. They will pay professional editors. They will pay a designer to do a nice cover. And you can make I think there's great opportunity there. It's just a question of how you handle it. I'm not sure that I'm addressing what you want to know.
Well, it sounds, and this is the feeling I have, that of the two options, traditional, for myself, I would choose the traditional path. Which is, again, nothing against self-publishing. But, I would choose traditional, and I was just curious if you had any thoughts on the pros and cons one way or the other.
The pro, and this could also be a con, is that there's no edit, right? There's no one overseeing the process. So you can have whatever cover you want. You don't have to cut chapter 3 if you're absolutely wedded to chapter 3 but your editor hates it. You don't have to kill off the character that I told you didn't belong in your novel at all. But it's a double-edged sword, right? Are you better off publishing it the way you see it, or is there something to be said for the professional overseer? But that being said, it's not always a choice, right? It could be that unfortunately you didn't find the right agent to agent your book, or your agent didn't find an editor to publish it. And so the good news is it's never too late. You can turn to self-publishing at that stage, and the door is closed.
You don't have that experienced pair of other eyes.
That's exactly right. But there are so many people who do freelance editing. There are agents like me who offer consulting services that you could pay someone to do those things for you if you don't have that relationship, or if you didn't find the traditional publisher to take on your book, that you could essentially produce the same thing. And there are a lot of people who are traditionally published authors who have certain projects that they just feel they don't want anyone to oversee, or they just want to get it out there immediately, or they use it as a tool to market their next big traditionally published book, and they'll self-publish their books as well. So, you know, I think there are pros and cons to both, but I think you have to realize sometimes it's not, you can't say, oh, I choose traditional, because traditional also has to choose you. And I don't say that to be harsh, but it's true. Traditional also has to choose you. You have to find someone willing to take on the project, whereas you can go on Amazon tonight and have your book available tomorrow. And I will say in Amazon's defense, and that's the one that I've worked with more often, so I know them better, but it's actually a pretty amazing service. And I think there's a way to get the white glove service, and they'll even help you design the cover. They'll give you some template. I did a couple of self-published books for a client. It was his backlist. These were political titles from the 70s that were kind of starting to become relevant again in the late 2000s. And we issued it as a whole series, and it was a lot of fun to do, but also I felt like they worked really well with us. They were very, very helpful. So I wouldn't totally rule it out. Go ahead.
Thank you.
I was going to Stacey, I have a response because one of my close friends just self-published, and I think the money is a big thing. You don't have to pay like those commissions to a publisher, but you have to be able to market yourself.
That's the big difference. That's right. Thank you. I forgot to mention that. Is the big thing is the market, right? If you don't know how to market your own book, you're just going to sit there on Amazon without. I mean, I can't even guess how many millions. I think if I had to guess, there's like 10 million books on Amazon. I don't, probably even more. Right? How do you make yourself stand out in the crowd? Now, again, if you're writing nonfiction, we talked about your target audience. In fiction, there's a target audience also, right? As much as we want to believe that every book is for everybody in the world, that's just not true, and that's not the way we as agents or editors work. We don't want to hear you tell me my book is for everybody, because that's just not true. It might appeal to different groups, but your job is to figure out who those groups are, and that's, as a self-publisher, I think if you don't take that seriously, there's very little chance that your book is going to get noticed.
I was wondering, I mean, conversely, if you took the non-traditional route, went on Amazon, you sold books, and you decided, well, I want to get an agent, would you need to show that agent, hey, I self-published this book, it sold 10,000 copies, and then they might take it a little more seriously.
Right, that's
well, I sold it on Amazon.
Fabulous question. So let me ask a follow-up question, and then I'm going to answer the question both ways. In this scenario, are you trying to sell that same book? Are you trying to get the agent to sell that same book to a traditional publisher, or are you coming to me now with book 2?
Book 2.
Okay, that's good. So you will, if you sold 10,000 copies on your own, you should mention that. You probably will get a little more attention from an agent, because that's a significant number, right? If you sold 20, whether you mention the fact that you self-published the book or not, we're eventually going to find out, because like you, we're going to Google, just like you Googled me before you queried me, I will eventually Google you before I sign a contract with you. So I'm going to find out that you self-published the book. It's not going to make or break my decision to work with you whatsoever. But I have a lot of people who come to me who say, I self-published a book, it's a bestseller on Amazon, I sold 1,000 copies, 700 copies, however many copies. I have to sit and think, have you already sold your book to everybody who's going to buy it? Or is this really a hidden gem and I can break this book out? Because very, we hear what's her name, 50 Shades of Grey, and thank you. And we hear about these other stories of people who self-publish their books and then those books become New York Times bestsellers or international bestsellers. That story is it is the exception to the rule. Most people who self-publish, it will be very hard to turn that book around and set the same book to a traditional publisher, because most of the time you have already reached the people you're going to reach if you manage to sell 10,000 copies on your own, or if you managed, even sometimes even 500 or 400. And sometimes you sold 20 copies because probably we're not able to publish that book traditionally. And so that, it becomes trickier. And my general rule of thumb is when I get that query that says, oh, I self-published and now I want you to sell this book, I usually write back, I'm really sorry I don't handle reprints. Because to me, it's just too risky. But if you sold 10,000 on your own and you're now coming back with book 2, I would encourage you to mention that in a query, because that will likely give you some attention. Any other questions? So how am I doing on time? Because I wanted to play a little bit of a game, but I don't want to run out of time.
You've got 25 minutes.
Awesome. Okay. Very quickly, a few things that agents cannot or should not or won't do for you. We cannot rewrite your work for you. We can't make it perfect. We can only offer suggestions. We can never guarantee that an editor will read your book. Just because we love it doesn't mean someone else will. Just because we say to you, we know editors we think will like it, doesn't mean that they actually will. I mean, I would assume that the agent is telling you the truth and they actually know these editors. That's not the part I'm worried about. But that doesn't mean that an editor has the time or chooses to be interested in that project. We cannot write publishers' contracts for them. Every publishing house has a boilerplate contract. The best that we can do, and we've talked a lot about this today, is negotiate those points. But I can't say, here's the Go Literary contract, sign this. It just doesn't work that way. We cannot sell, unfortunately, well, we hope to, but we can't guarantee to sell every manuscript that we take on. We cannot accept or turn down advances or contracts or any stipulations in the contract without consulting with you. I am not legally authorized to act on your behalf. I act as your consultant. I can gather the information. I can offer you advice. I cannot tell you what to do, and I certainly, I was going to say sure as hell, but I won't swear. Certainly can't do it without consulting you first. And we can't guarantee fame and fortune. I'm sorry, I know that's why you're all here today, but it's not a guarantee. It's a hope, and we want it for you and as much as you want it for yourselves. A few things that agents should do and that you should be wary of if your agent is not doing. Returning your phone calls. I know that sounds pretty obvious, but really if your agent is not returning your phone calls within a reasonable time period, you should be a little bit worried. An agent should give you realistic expectations. Have you written the next bestseller? Maybe. But I would be wary of an agent whose first words out of their mouth are, this is going to be a bestseller. Because, again, we just can't guarantee that. It might be a way of expressing enthusiasm, and that's wonderful, but just be clear, be clear about what the actual realistic expectations are. An agent should always offer guidance or suggestions for improving your book. It would be odd to me, I think, that an agent read something and say, this is perfect, not even a comma out of place, let's go. There is generally an editing period before we turn around and try to sell things. And an agent should always keep you up to date on the status of your submissions. So when he or she is out pitching your work for you, you should know what's going on. So now the big question, how the hell do I find an agent if I want one? And I should give you a caveat there. For people who are saying, not really for me, the one thing you do need to know is the big five, so Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Hachette, will not look at your work if you're not agented. Those are not agents that you are free or welcome to query on your own unless you happen to meet one at a conference and she says, or he says, oh, I love your work, send it to me. But normally they'll say, oh, I love your work, who's your agent? Oh, you don't have one, get one, then send it to me. So that's just something to keep in the back of your minds. If you have your heart set on one of the big five, or if you really think that's where you belong, you should know that you will need an agent. We've already talked about this, and I don't need to repeat this for a bunch of MFA students. Read, write, write, write. You cannot do anything else to help, anything more to help your craft than to hone it by reading and continuously rewriting and rewriting, and then editing, polishing, and when you think you're done, do it once more. We talked a bit about platform, learning about the publishing industry. You're all here today, so you can check that one off your list. Researching agents. I mentioned before that we don't all like everything, and some of us only work in certain genres or certain categories. And unfortunately, we're not the nicest people in that we don't always put it out there exactly what we want, but it is worth, and I implore you to take the time to research agents before you query them, because you will be rejected for querying somebody who doesn't represent what you are writing, and you will feel bad about it, and it's a needless rejection. So if you could save yourself the pain, but also there are some agents who get really angry about it, and unfortunately they talk to friends and they're like, oh, you got a query from so-and-so, he's so unprofessional, he thought that I represent this. It's really silly, it's really petty, we're not bad people, I'm not sure why this happens, but it's something to be aware of. So take the time to research which agents represent what kind of work.
When you say query an
Yeah.
agent, that's before you send a manuscript.
Yes, so that's a great question too. That's the second part of your research is, as agents, we all have different submissions requirements. I, for example, prefer only to receive a query letter. Send me an email to the specific address. I don't care what font you use. I don't care what color you use. But a lot of my colleagues do. And if you don't use the font that they're looking for, if you don't structure the email exactly as they want it to be structured, they will delete you. They will not reply. They will not read your manuscript.
Why
Oh, sorry. No, I'll answer that in 1 second, but I want to give you the second half of your question about sending the manuscript. Some of us like to receive pages with a query letter. I don't. I'm not a horribly mean or picky person, so if you accidentally sent me pages, I wouldn't delete you. I would only read those pages if I thought I was interested in them, but I do know people who don't want to receive pages, and if you attach pages, delete. I also know people who expect to receive 5 pages with your query letter, and if they don't get those 5 pages, delete. I know some people who prefer 3 pages, and if you don't get that right, delete. 10 pages. So you have to be really careful before you query anybody to look at what their submission guidelines are and see, do I send my, and the answer is you never send a full manuscript. There is nobody who wants a full manuscript with a query letter. I can't think of a single agent who would want that.
Okay,
I think
so
the most I can think of is a couple of agents who like 10 pages.
So they'll identify on
They
their
will
website
say very specifically on their website what they
letter.
want.
I see. Okay.
So, but in general, and this is what I want to end with. So I mentioned Publishers Marketplace before. That's a great place for you as writers to start researching agents, because the same way I go on Publishers Marketplace to see what editors bought what books, you can go on Publishers Marketplace and see what agents sold what books. So, for example, if you went to my listing on Publishers Marketplace, you would see, the books I've sold in the last year, or you click on another button to see all the books I've ever sold, and you can get a sense of, oh, she really likes historical fiction. Oh, she's really into, I don't know, food, or she loves narrative nonfiction. Oh, she really likes sports, or whatever it is. And you go, oh, she's never sold a children's book. Maybe she doesn't do children's books, et cetera, et cetera. But you can also look at their websites, and most of us list what our interests are. The second website I recommend for this is Poets and Writers. They have an amazing agents section. They list agents alphabetically. They will link to their website, but they will also tell you on their own site exactly what categories we represent and don't. So very helpful. Going back to your question about the query letter, think of your query letter as a sales pitch. As much as we all have different submissions requirements, there are very fundamental things that we all want to see in the query letter, and this is sad and obnoxious, especially because you're all creative writers. I urge you not to deviate from the standard formula. We really don't like it. Mostly because I'm a one-person agency and I get upwards of 400 queries a week. You can imagine the giant New York City agencies that have 100, they're getting thousands and thousands of query letters a week. I kid you not when I say we don't have more than a few seconds to be intrigued by your work. And if we're not, delete. I mean, I'm still at the stage where I'm polite enough to write you a very nice, I really, your project sounds interesting but isn't right for me, but most people will just delete, 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 delete. You want to do everything you can not to be that person, and so as soon as I get that query letter that says, Dear Amaryah, or Dear Miss Orenstein, I know that there's a standard formula, but permit me from deviate, and Then they go on, and sometimes you get the whole you get this whole person's life story before you even know what the book is about. And I kid you not, I'm reaching the point where I'm busy enough that I can't read that full letter. I'm sure you're a lovely person. I'm sure you have a really interesting life story. If I like your manuscript, I'm gonna call you. We're gonna have a great conversation where we think it's kind of like speed dating. We're gonna figure out if we like each other and if we work well together. I'm gonna get to know your life story as our relationship develops, just like I don't know everything about you guys in the room right now, but if we had a conversation for an hour, I would slowly and surely start to learn a few things about you, and then in 2 years I would know a lot of things about you. I don't really want to know almost any of that in that initial email. And it's not because I'm mean. I'm a people person. I love people. That's not what I'm after in the query letter. I want to know what your book's about. I want to know if it's interesting. I want to know if you write well, and I want to know if I can sell it. Everything else there's time for. So the best thing you can do is write a strong query letter. Please don't go over 1 page, and I teach a query class, and I strongly encourage people, if you can keep it under 300 words, even 200, the shorter the better. Don't oversell your book, so don't write to me, I am the next John Grisham. Let me tell you that you are the next John Grisham. But when we get emails that say and I kid you not, I get emails that say I am the next John Grisham. You're probably not. Not because you're not a great writer, but first of all, you're your own writer, you're your own voice, and also, there is already a John Grisham. Like, you know how many people try to imitate John Grisham? Good luck. I get emails that say something like, you'll kick yourself or you'll kill yourself if you pass on my book. I've had people offer me their houses on Nantucket if I will be their agent. Please avoid doing all of these things. I really want to come to your house in Nantucket, but don't offer it up as a selling pitch. Tell me what your story is about. And don't go the other way. Self-deprecation is equally a turn-off, right? If you're not confident in your own work, how am I as an agent going to be confident in selling your work? Probably I'm not. So you're trying to strike that perfect balance between not arrogant and not, oh, I'm the worst writer in the world, I hope you'll read this, I'm really sorry for bothering you. Please don't use strange fonts. Your creativity should come out in your writing, not in your choice of font. And again, it's not because I'm obnoxious. I know that fun fonts are fun. I'm a big Bitmoji person on my cell phone, but this is a professional setting and you're not in elementary school. And it's really, this sounds so obnoxious and I'm gonna sound so old, it's really hard to read. And if I can't read your query, I'm probably not gonna read your query. So what do you want to see in your query letter? I always encourage people to personalize their query letters. So, dear Amaryah, we met on Ender's Island. I'm hoping you'll like my book. That kind of thing, I'm generalizing, or dear so-and-so, and please never write dear so-and-so. 99.9% of my colleagues will delete if it says dear agent or to whom it may concern. You've taken the time, you've done your research, we have names, please use them, because again, it's a ridiculous reason for being rejected, but I know people who will just delete. And I'm starting to feel a little, I had 9 queries this week, I think, where I had somebody address me by some other agent's name, so clearly you're querying that person too, but that's fine, you're allowed, but really it takes 3 seconds to reread your work before you hit send. I've had my name misspelled in every single way, which doesn't really bother me, but it sort of makes me think you're rushing this. I've been called Mr. This week I was called Mr. twice. I'm pretty sure you went to my website to find my address, so you kind of must know that I'm not a guy unless I really need a new picture on that website, etc. You know, you're getting the point. I'm being a little facetious, but these things do matter, right? Anything you can do to put your most professional foot forward. But when you're doing that research, at the very least, if you haven't met us individually, you've spent time on our websites, you know what we like. So, dear so-and-so, I'm reaching out because you represent X, who is my favorite author and writes in the same genre as I do, right? Any connection that you could make to show that you're not just doing the dear agent and querying every single one of us will help you. That's the first step. And you know, you want to keep that short and sweet. Don't go on for 10 pages about how you know how much we love coffee or this or that. Your hook. Right? If you can boil your story down, and this works for fiction and nonfiction, to 3 main points. Introduce your protagonist and his or her conflict, lay out the stakes, right? What choices does this character face? And tell us what sets your book apart from any other book or from other books in the genre. That's all we want to see in your query letter. I don't want the 2-page synopsis of, in chapter 1, Charlie goes to the chocolate factory, or I guess in chapter 1 he gets sick, or whatever, whatever it is. You don't want to lay out the step-by-step development of the story. You want very broad strokes. And I always tell people to think about it like a movie trailer. Imagine your book as a movie, and then imagine the trailer for that movie. What would the obnoxious voiceover say? If he doesn't say it, I don't want it in your query letter because it's too much detail. So minor characters, insignificant love interests, random road trips, all kinds of weird details that people feel compelled to include. Those are all exciting things that I'm going to learn as I read your manuscript and the story unfolds. All you need to do is get me to the edge of my seat to say, oh, I really need to read this. Oh my God, that sounds awesome. And that was a really horrible way of describing it, but you want us to have that feeling of, I need this book now. If you give me everything that happens in the story, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to feel like I've already read your book, so I don't need to request it. And then finally, a biography. Very brief. It should never be longer than the synopsis of your story. Please avoid cataloging every single thing you've done in your life. Pro tip, don't tell us you started writing when you were 7 years old and you've been writing ever since. Everybody says it. We don't believe you. It doesn't matter. We want to know your professional credentials, if you have any. If not, if any sort of professional training. If you're lawyers, if you're doctors who are writing medical thrillers, that matters. If you are second career people, we want to know what you did before. If you don't feel comfortable telling us, that's totally fine. You don't need to include a biography. It's an optional. Paragraphs 1 and paragraphs 2, the personal connection and the story synopsis, not optional. We talked about the self-publishing question, so I don't need to ask that. The other thing people always ask me is, what kind of publishing credits should I include? You're all MFA students. We want to know that you're MFA students. If you've published anything in and around this program, if you've published in literary journals or in technical journals in the fields that you work in, if you're writing a cycling memoir and you publish in a cycling magazine, we want to know about that kind of thing. We don't really want to know about your publications in your church and synagogue bulletins. We don't really want to know about your friend's blog that has 5 viewers. That kind of stuff, not that important. It's not going to make or break your query.
What if we have a professional website that we...
You should give us the link. You invite us to visit, but just at the bottom, say, for more information, please feel free to visit. Don't put that in lieu of a bio or a synopsis. I get people who send query letters in 40 size font. Congratulations, my new book is out. Visit this website for all the details and my biography. Thanks, but no thanks. Right. And again, it's not because I'm mean, but there's a level of unprofessionalism there that I'm already not interested. But absolutely, if you maintain a professional website, at the bottom of the query, you could put it in your signature, or you could just at the end of your biography, please feel free to visit my website, or I maintain. If you're somebody with hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers and you're writing nonfiction, especially, you want to show you have a platform, you can include that kind of information. If you just dabble in social media, we don't need to know about that right now. If you think it's relevant, if you think it adds to the ability to sell or make your book look appealing, then it's worth including. Otherwise, again, these are all things I'm going to ask you about on that wonderful initial phone call, and we'll get to know over coffee if we happen to live close enough to each other, etc. But you don't want to bombard, right? It's kind of a short and sweet. Any other question?
I'm sorry. I was taking notes on this. Did you say that any personal connection, whatever your personal connections is with your subject matter, not advised to include that?
No, if you have a personal relation to your subject matter, you absolutely should include it, right? So like I said, if you're a doctor writing medical thrillers, I really want to know that you're a doctor because it shows a level of expertise in writing those scenes that someone like me with a background in history probably doesn't have. Doesn't mean I can't get it by shadowing a doctor or finding a doctor friend to ask questions to. But if you are in the field in which you're writing about, we absolutely should know about it.
Thank you.
Sure. Go ahead.
So for memoirs, what the book is about is kind of going to match the bio.
Right, so you wouldn't have to do both paragraphs if you didn't want to. You could skip the bio, or let's say it's a memoir about your childhood and now you're, you know, I don't know, an activist in whatever movement, or a doctor, or a whatever. You could have that one, or again, you're still an MFA student, that's probably not part of your memoir. Right, so you would, well, maybe it is, I don't know. But I would imagine it's probably not a memoir about being a student in this program. So you would say, I'm an MFA student at Fairfield University. You know, it doesn't have to be a long bio. It's just whatever you feel like sharing that you think is worth. And if you think it's all covered in the memoir, then don't say anything else. I mean, if it's all covered in the synopsis paragraph, that's fine. Just that, thanks for your consideration, or I'd be happy to share pages, or I look forward to hearing from you. That's it. Other questions? How am I doing on time? Do we have time to mock query letter or no?
4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. I was going to say some other things, but I'm going to skip those over because I think this will be a more fun way to end. But I will end by saying that the one thing I want you, I know it's a little bit scary having all this information thrown at you, and I hope I didn't turn anybody off, but I do want to encourage you not to get discouraged. Finding an agent is a really difficult process. Writing a book is a really difficult process. I would say you've already been through the hardest part. There most likely is somebody out there for you. If it's not the first person you query, if it's not the first 10 people you query, doesn't mean that you should give up and go and become a dentist. It just means you should think about the feedback you're getting, and or maybe you haven't narrowed your search down yet to the right person, and that's fine. People always tell me that as writers, they're told not to get discouraged until they've gotten 100 rejection letters from agents. I know people, I kid you not, I know somebody who found her agent on her 137th try, and that book went on to do phenomenally well. So I will leave you with that motivational note. But if we have 3 minutes still, can I get somebody to volunteer for me? Can you read query sample letter number 1? And you can read the punctuation if there's a lot of it, and then we can talk about what works and what doesn't work in this query.
I wish everybody could see this.
Yes, awesome.
Okay. Dear sir, I need your attention right now.
3 exclamation points.
Yeah.
All yellow mine.
You have to represent my book immediately. This isn't a joke. I need you
Capital
to
letters.
represent me and or my book. The Murphy's Take Manhattan is hot off my printer and scalding my palms. I'm not kidding. My palms are covered in blisters. This is the most shocking story about the most amazing family in the history of the most horrifying world. My family's name is the Murphys. You will not believe what happens to them. But it is nonetheless harrowingly believable. At the incredible but all too possible opening of the book, the Murphys moved to New York City, the coolest city in the world.
7 exclamation points.
Right away, something awful, terrible, and extremely bad happens. There's an earthquake. Everyone explodes.
So many exclamation points I can't even count them.
Can you imagine the horror?
3 question marks.
Probably not.
Exclamation point.
That's why you need me, a writer, to imagine it for you. I have enclosed my shockingly well-written 450-page manuscript for you to read right now.
3 exclamation.
I can't wait to hear what you think.
4 exclamation points.
May I call you? Don't worry, I plan to anyway.
3 exclamation points.
Have an awesome day.
Like 25 exclamation points.
Becky Choosh.
4
She
exclamation points.
signed it with exclamation points after her name.
Is that real?
Okay, that particular one did not come to me. It's something that a lot of us agents use as kind of an example. I kid you not, I have received many query letters that look exactly like that. So it could very well be real, and that I get at least one of those a week. And then the ones who usually say, "Can I call you?" call before they send. It's like sent and call. But I don't mind the phone call, but it's funny that you ask and then don't wait for an answer. Anything we like about that query?
Confident.
Yeah, they were confident.
It was confident. It's a very slippery slope between confident and super arrogant. I'm gonna say this one falls on the wrong side of that slope.
Well, doesn't that also show desperation?
Yes.
You just want to show
Yes.
that yes, you got the manuscript that you think is going to do well, but it's not going to be profitable in terms of, let's say, editors / agents and publications companies.
Very good point. Any other problems with this?
Well, do you want to work with this person?
Oh, come on, she sounds totally awesome. 25
We're
hours.
working on a percentage. How much time is she going to?
Right.
You
Right,
know,
and remember that part where I said the agent can't rewrite the book for you? Also a good point. Go ahead.
At its core, I mean, it just touches on what you've been reiterating about professionalism.
There's a lack of...
All of that punctuation seems like it's all girl text.
Right. Right. And I'm not going to lie, every now and then I send an email that looks like if I get really excited about something, if a publisher really loved my client's notes, you know, you'll do that, but not in the initial introductory email. Go ahead.
It also didn't have like any specific details about what happened.
Thank you. What is that book about? Because I have no idea.
This is just a personal question between me and you.
Sure.
If you were to receive a letter like that, how long does it take in your mind to come up and say, is it like a 1 second, 2 second, and you go,
I
I'm just
probably...
gonna get-
So, this one's not so long, so I probably would have read the whole thing. But by the time I saw the third set of exclamation points, I for sure would have been finished. I would have known already, but sometimes I have to skim to the end so that I can figure out what I'm politely going to say as to why. I'm not going to write back and say, you're an idiot, this email reads like a 6-year-old stole your phone. I need to find a polite, if I was a harsher person, that's probably what I should do, is give this girl, throw her a bone and say, this is not a professional query, please feel free to re-query me, visit my website for guidelines, or, by the way, I offer query letter consultations, feel free to pay me and you can query another agent. But sometimes I feel like, why should I do their homework for them? If this is what she thinks, I don't know this person, I don't owe her anything. It depends on my mood. If I was in a really nice, generous mood, I have done that to somebody before who wrote me one of those, I know this isn't what my query letter should look like, but, and then he sent, I kid you not, it must have been 5 printed pages and pictures. He attached pictures of his family. I don't care what your family looks like. I wrote back to him and I said, I appreciate you warning me that this wasn't a traditional query. I'd like to strongly encourage you to stick to the traditional model because most agents are not going to read this, and I'm sorry, I can't,
Just one more question.
Please.
So, if you found a book that you as an agent do like, but it's not happen to be your specialty or any of it, then what do you do?
That's a great question. I personally don't generally recommend other agents. Not because I don't want you to go to my competition. It's not like that. I don't feel competition. There are enough writers out there for all of us. But just because the industry is so subjective, I've had it come back to, like I once suggested, oh, go to so-and-so, and that person didn't like the book. And then she called, and she was, oh, you told me to go to this person. Are you kidding me? I mean, I can't guarantee that my friend is going to like your book. I just said maybe try her. So I have stopped saying, I don't represent this, but so-and-so does. What I'll do is say, I don't represent this category. Please visit Publishers Marketplace and find other agents who do, or something like that. But the industry is too subjective for me to say, oh, go to so-and-so, she'll love it. I just can't. That one person hadn't been so mean, maybe I would still do it.
So tell me about your query level consultation. You can hold those classes? Do you give?
I do hold classes. I also do it privately. People just email me.
Okay, what's it cost?
It costs, really? You want to know?
I do.
Oh, yeah. It costs $69 flat rate, and I will go back and forth with you until your query letter is good to go.
Expect a letter.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind of you. other questions? Can I hold them back for 30 seconds so we can do one more? Or are you guys dying to get out of here? If you feel like you need to leave, you could totally go. But if you want to see the opposite end of the spectrum, can you?
Let's hear a good one.
Can I read?
Yeah, please.
I just got excited.
Oh, you want to read?
Yeah.
Oh, come. Sure. Oh, wait.
Let
Can I?
Miss Hart's really invested in doing this.
Okay, let's do this one.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, no problem. Sorry to keep you.
Yeah. So,
Just read it. And if there's funky punctuation, let us know. Because now I can't remember which one I gave you.
thanks. Jim, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Rebecca Lynn. T-U-C-H-I.
Yeah.
With your kind permission, I would like to request your representation of my latest office, The Murphys Take the Manhattan, in which I have no doubt that you will find the various attributes of the most exceptional works of the high literary, high upmarket, high fiction. In regards to the narrative structure, you will find my work something of the following sequences of the events. Family of the
Appellate.
Murphy relocates to the coastal city of New York, only to find themselves the unwitting victim of that most tragic of events. An earthquake of a Richter measurement 9. In the selection of the words that I have carefully arranged in a meaningful and
Syntactical
order, my belief is that you'll find such a vital elements as descriptive setting and well-paced narrative prose. Additionally, you will experience a catharsis 3/4 of the way through. This will be likely a result of numerous accumulating courses, a well-timed epiphany, experienced by a lovely, lauded protagonist, a remarkably operatic denouement, and friendliness, accessibility, and the edgy but timeless appeal of the Courier, my chosen font. Without further ado, I would like to conclude this letter by emphasizing my rebellious yearning to commence publication of my writings with highly regarded Rebecca.
No, read her full name. Come on.
Rebecca Lynn Tush, and I don't know.
Oh,
nay,
Rebecca Lynn Touch, nay, Touch Verderber. So what do you think about this one? Thank you so much.
Do you have a good letter?
I do have a good letter. So you don't think this one was a good one?
No.
What was wrong with it?
Little too long.
The head couldn't fit in that room.
So flowery, so formal, so overblown, and so freaking boring, right? Like, don't you just feel like you spent 3 hours reading that?
Yeah.
You don't want to be that formal. Okay, a good, wait, if anyone needs to go, you should feel free to walk out, but a good one, do you want to read it? No?
No.
Do you want to read it?
I'm sure somebody would like to. Thank you. Dear Ms. Orenstein, I am writing to you at the recommendation of my dear friend and colleague Malcolm Bell, who speaks very highly of you and who thought that, given your background in U.S. history, you might consider representing my memoir, White Lawyer, Black Power, Civil Rights Lawyer in Mississippi and Alabama. That italics, thank you, yes. Inspired by a colleague's involvement in the Mississippi Summer Project of 1964, Wall Street attorney Don Jelenic journeyed to the Deep South to volunteer as a civil rights lawyer during the course of his three-week vacation in the summer of 1965. He stayed for 3 years. From 1965 to 1968, Jelenic worked in Mississippi and Alabama as an organizer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, in caps, and as an attorney for the Lawyers Constitutional Defense Committee, LCDC, established by the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, in 1964 to provide legal assistance to the civil rights movement. In White Lawyer, In White Lawyer, Black Power, Jelenic recounts the various legal battles he fought in defense of militant civil rights activists and rural African Americans, risking his career and his life to further the struggle for racial equality. Among his many achievements, Jelenic established the Southern Rural Research Project to investigate and challenge the discriminatory nature of USDA programs in the Black Belt. By highlighting the failure of the 1964 Civil Rights Act to improve the day-to-day lives of Southern blacks, Jelenic's experiences as volunteer counsel shed important light on the shift in the black freedom struggle from civil rights to black power in the wake of this monumental legislation. After spending 3 years as a civil rights lawyer in Mississippi and Alabama, Jelenic, a native of New York City, settled in California. In 1969, he joined the Native Americans who occupied Alcatraz Island as a protest against the federal government's treatment of Indians, and then defended them in court. In 1971, he returned to New York State as chief counsel for the indicted survivors of the Attica prison revolt. Jelenic, who ran for mayor of Berkeley in 1994, continues to practice law and has written cover stories for the nation. Might I send you a copy of White Lawyer, Black Power for your consideration?
That's it, that's the end. I forgot to print that. So that's why do we like that one? Oh, and that answers your question about a memoir, but it had a bio paragraph, right? That, after spending 3 years as a civil rights lawyer, that's not part of the book. That's him telling me his little life story. But what do we like about this query?
It's very specific, and the fact that he has his own background in the subject, and you have said even if you're a doctor writing about medical thriller, you would like to know his professional credentials before you do it.
Good. What else do we like?
He also used a personal connection and didn't attach a 450-page manuscript,
Right.
which was probably 200 pages of exclamation points.
Exactly.
It has inherent interest.
It has inherent interest, right? That helps. I mean, it helps that I mentioned I have a background in history. I specifically studied the 1960s. SNCC was one of the organizations I wrote my dissertation on. He didn't know any of that, or if he did, he didn't throw it in there like, oh, you're gonna love this because it's exactly what you like to read, right? It wasn't pushy about it. He just put forth a story. What else do we like about it? God.
I like how it's very comprehensive in what it, in showing the writer's background. My question about it is, might you as an agent think it was a little lengthy?
It was a little bit long. I'm not gonna lie. It was a little bit long, but he held my interest, right? If you can hold my interest, it's okay. And in rereading it, because he was my client, unfortunately, he passed away. When I went to pitch the book, I looked very closely at this query for my pitch, and I kept thinking, like, what can I cut? What can I cut? But if you go through the lines, he doesn't go into the nitty-gritty of the story, right? When he says, risked his life, where is that line? He fought in defense of militant civil rights activists, risking his career and his life to further the struggle for racial equality. He doesn't tell us how. He doesn't go into the horrendous details. He was almost shot in the head. They bulleted the house that he was staying on. He had to sleep on the floor. The windows fell in, right? He could have put all of that detail, and then it would get longer and longer. And I might have remained interested because it's so inherently interesting to me. But he also might have lost me because I would have been like, this is going too far. I don't have time to read. He really was succinct. He didn't go into plot details. This is just the larger narrative arc. And you were talking about not being too boastful and no millions of exclamation points, right? The only grandiose word, right? The word monumental. But he's not talking about his own actions. He was talking about the civil rights legislation. Nowhere does he write, I'm a hero, look at what I did. This is awesome, right? It's very modest. So the tone is spot on. But I think you're right to say, in retrospect, it's a little bit long. Any other comments, questions, things we want to know? People are dying to go. Thank you all so much for having me.